I never thought I would be writing up a police report on my own neighbor. But there I was at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in February, sitting in my cruiser outside the Meadowbrook Community entrance in Columbus, Ohio, watching security footage that would make my blood boil for the next several hours. My name is Ryan Xander, and I have been a police officer with the Columbus Police Department for 8 years now. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in the Meadowbrook Community subdivision on the northeast side of the city, a neighborhood that prided itself on perfectly manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and an HOA that seemed to have nothing better to do than make everyone's life miserable. The president of our HOA was a woman named Patricia Henderson, a 52-year-old real estate agent with too much time on her hands and an inflated sense of authority that would put some actual law enforcement officers to shame. But this story is not really about Patricia, though she plays a supporting role. This story is about her right-hand woman, her vice president and chief enforcer, a woman who embodied every single Karen stereotype you could possibly imagine. Her name was Linda Morrison, and she had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single resident of Meadowbrook Community followed every single rule in the HOA handbook, down to the exact shade of beige allowed on window shutters. The whole mess started on a particularly brutal Monday morning in early February. Ohio winters are no joke, and that year we had been hit with storm after storm, each one dumping several inches of snow and leaving behind a thick layer of ice on every surface imaginable. I had worked the night shift, which meant I got home around 7 in the morning, exhausted and ready to collapse into bed. But first, I had to deal with my car, which was covered in about a 1/4 inch of ice from freezing rain that had fallen during the last 2 hours of my shift. I parked in my driveway, grabbed my ice scraper from the passenger seat where I always kept it, and started the tedious process of clearing my windshield. The scraper was nothing fancy, just a simple blue plastic one with a brush on one end and a blade on the other, but it had been with me for 5 years and did the job perfectly. I managed to clear about half the windshield before my phone rang. It was my sergeant, asking me to clarify something in a report I had filed the night before. I walked a few feet away from my car, standing near my mailbox as I explained the details while my breath created little clouds in the frigid air. The call lasted maybe 10 minutes. When I hung up and turned back toward my car, I noticed Linda Morrison standing in her driveway across the street, loading some boxes into her white Lexus SUV. She glanced at me, and I gave her a polite nod which she did not return. That was typical Linda. Unless she was approaching you with a violation notice or a complaint, she did not acknowledge your existence. I walked back to my car, ready to finish scraping the ice, but my scraper was gone. I looked on the ground around the car, thinking maybe it had fallen. Nothing. I checked inside the car, though I knew I had not put it back. Still nothing. I looked around the driveway, increasingly confused and frustrated. The scraper had been sitting right there on my hood while I took that phone call, and now it had vanished. Then I heard an engine start and looked up to see Linda backing out of her driveway. Something blue was sticking out of her front passenger window, and my stomach dropped. That was my ice scraper. I was sure of it. I jogged across the street, waving my hand to get her attention, but she either did not see me or chose to ignore me. She drove off down the street, and I stood there in the middle of the road, absolutely baffled. Why would Linda Morrison steal my ice scraper? It made no sense. The woman drove a Lexus and lived in a house twice the size of mine. She could afford to buy 100 ice scrapers if she wanted. But there it was, my blue scraper in her car, disappearing around the corner of Meadowbrook Drive. I was too tired to deal with it right then. I went inside, Sent a text to my friend Marcus, who lived 2 streets over, asking if I could borrow his scraper tomorrow, and fell into bed. But the whole thing nagged at me. It was not about the scraper itself. You could buy one at any gas station for $5. It was the principle of the thing, the sheer audacity of taking something that clearly belonged to someone else. When I woke up around 3 that afternoon, I decided to walk over to Linda's house and ask for my scraper back. Maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe she had grabbed it thinking it was hers, though that seemed unlikely given that she had to have walked across the street and into my driveway to get it. Still, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt before jumping to conclusions. Linda's house was a 2-story colonial with pale yellow siding and white shutters, every detail perfectly maintained according to HOA standards. I rang the doorbell and waited. After a moment, she opened the door, looking at me with an expression that suggested I was interrupting something very important. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped and impatient. "Hey, Linda, sorry to bother you. This morning when I got home from work, I think there might have been a mix-up with my ice scraper. I saw a blue one in your car as you were leaving, and mine went missing around the same time. Any chance you accidentally picked it up?" Her eyes narrowed. "I have no idea what you are talking about. The scraper in my car is mine. I have owned it for years." I kept my voice calm and friendly. "The thing is, I am pretty sure it is mine. It has a small crack near the handle and the brush bristles are a bit worn on one side. Maybe we could just take a quick look and clear this up." "Are you accusing me of stealing your property?" Her voice rose slightly, taking on that indignant tone that I had heard her use with other neighbors. "No, not at all. I just think there might have been a mistake." "There was no mistake. That scraper is mine. And frankly, I find it incredibly rude that you would come to my home and make such accusations. If you are missing your belongings, perhaps you should be more careful with them instead of harassing your neighbors." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my composure. Years of dealing with difficult people as a cop had taught me how to stay calm in frustrating situations. "Linda, I am not trying to harass you. I just want my ice scraper back. I know what I saw." "What you saw was my personal property in my personal vehicle. Now, if you will excuse me, I have things to do." She stepped back and closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, genuinely shocked. I had dealt with plenty of hostile people in my line of work, but this was different. This was my neighbor, someone I saw regularly, someone who was supposed to be part of a community. And she had just blatantly lied to me about taking something that belonged to me. I walked back home, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to just let it go, buy a new scraper, and move on with my life. But another part of me, the part that had spent 8 years enforcing laws and holding people accountable, refused to let this slide. If Linda thought she could just take whatever she wanted and lie about it, she needed to learn otherwise. When I got home, I remembered something. My house had a security camera. I had installed it about 6 months earlier after there had been a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. The camera was mounted above my garage and had a clear view of my driveway and part of the street. If Linda had come over and taken my scraper, it would be on video. I pulled up the app on my phone and scrolled back to that morning. Sure enough, there it was, clear as day. The timestamp showed 7:14 a.m. I was standing near my mailbox, phone to my ear, my back partially turned to my car. The scraper was clearly visible on the hood. Then, at 7:16 a.m., Linda Morrison walked across the street from her house, looked around quickly, grabbed my ice scraper, and walked back to her driveway. She got in her car moments later and drove off, just as I was ending my phone call. I watched the footage 3 times, my disbelief growing with each viewing. She had not accidentally picked it up. She had deliberately walked over, taken it, and then lied directly to my face about it when I confronted her. This was not a misunderstanding. This was theft. The rational part of my brain told me to just show her the footage and demand she return it. But I had a feeling that even with video evidence, Linda would find some way to deny it or twist the situation. I needed to think about this carefully. That evening, I called my friend Jake Sullivan, who also worked at the department as a detective. We had gone through the academy together and had stayed close over the years. I explained the situation to him over the phone, and he listened without interrupting. "So let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your HOA vice president stole your ice scraper, you have her on camera doing it, and when you asked for it back, she lied and said it was hers. That's exactly what happened. And this is the same woman who sent you a violation notice last year because your grass was a quarter-inch too tall, the very same." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Man, HOA people are something else. So what are you going to do? File a report?" "I am thinking about it. I mean, technically it is theft, but it feels kind of petty to make an official report over a $5 ice scraper." "It is not about the scraper, though, is it? It is about the principle. She stole from you, lied about it, and thinks she can get away with it because she has got some little bit of power in your neighborhood." "Exactly." "Here is what I think," Jake said. "Keep the footage. If she returns the scraper and apologizes, fine, let it go. But if she keeps it and continues to act like she did nothing wrong, then yeah, maybe it is worth filing a report. People like that need to learn they are not above the law just because they are on some HOA board." That seemed like a reasonable approach. I decided to wait a few days and see if Linda had a change of heart. Maybe she would realize that what she did was wrong and return the scraper with an apology. I was willing to give her that chance, but Linda Morrison was not the apologizing type. The next day, I was home during the afternoon, doing some work around the house, when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Patricia Henderson standing there with a clipboard and a very official-looking expression. "Good afternoon, Ryan. I need to speak with you about a complaint that has been filed." "A complaint? About what?" She consulted her clipboard. "Linda Morrison has reported that you came to her home yesterday and harassed her with false accusations. She says you accused her of stealing from you and became verbally aggressive when she denied your claims." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "That is not what happened at all. I went over to ask about my ice scraper, which I saw in her car." I was polite the entire time, and she is the one who became defensive and slammed the door in my face. Patricia's expression did not change. "According to our HOA bylaws, harassment of fellow residents is a serious violation. Linda is requesting that you issue a written apology to her, or the board will have to consider further action." "Further action? Like what?" "Potential fines, and if the behavior continues, we could move toward placing a lien on your property." Now I was angry. "Patricia, let me make something very clear. I did not harass Linda. I asked her a simple question about my property that she took from my driveway, and I have video evidence to prove it." For the first time, Patricia looked slightly uncertain. "Video evidence?" "My security camera caught the whole thing. Linda walked over to my car while I was on the phone, took my ice scraper, and then lied about it when I asked for it back. So before you start talking about fines and liens, maybe you should get the whole story." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I suppose if there is video evidence that changes things. Can I see it?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the footage. She watched in silence, her expression growing more uncomfortable with each passing second. "I see," she said when it finished. "This is quite concerning. I will need to speak with Linda about this." "I would appreciate that. And I would also appreciate it if this harassment complaint was dropped, seeing as how I did absolutely nothing wrong. Yes, of course. I will handle this and get back to you. She left, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction. At least Patricia seemed to be reasonable, unlike her second in command. I figured that would be the end of it. Linda would return the scraper, Patricia would give her a talking to about stealing from neighbors, and life would go back to normal. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came home from running errands to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, informing me that I was being fined $250 for an unauthorized security camera that violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. According to the notice, all exterior cameras had to be approved by the board before installation, and mine had never been approved. I read the notice twice, fury building in my chest. This was retaliation, plain and simple. Linda knew she had been caught on camera stealing my property, and now she was using her position on the HOA board to punish me for having that camera in the first place. I called Patricia immediately. She answered on the third ring. "Patricia, what is this fine for my security camera?" "I have had that camera installed for 6 months, and nobody said anything about it until now." "I understand your frustration, Ryan, but the rules are clear. All exterior modifications, including security cameras, must be submitted for approval before installation. You never submitted an application." "Because I did not know I needed to. And even if that is true, why is this coming up now, right after I showed you footage of Linda stealing from me?" There was a pause. "The timing is coincidental. Linda was doing her monthly neighborhood inspection and noticed the camera. She brought it to the board's attention, and we had to enforce the rules. This is retaliation, Patricia, and you know it. I am sorry you feel that way, but the fine stands. You can either remove the camera or submit an application for approval. If approved, the fine will be waived." "And if I submit an application, how long does the approval process take?" Another pause. "Typically 4 to 6 weeks. And in the meantime, the fine accumulates. The fine is a one-time assessment, but if the camera remains without approval after 30 days, additional fines may be applied." I hung up without saying goodbye. This had gone from annoying to infuriating. Linda had stolen my property, lied about it, filed a false harassment complaint against me, and was now using HOA rules to retaliate against me for having evidence of her theft. And Patricia was either complicit or too weak to stand up to her. That night, I made a decision. I was going to file an official police report. I did not care if it seemed petty. Linda needed to face consequences for her actions, and if the HOA was not going to hold her accountable, then the legal system would. The next morning, I went to the station during my day off and filed a report for theft. The officer taking the report, a younger guy named Officer Mike Torres, who I knew casually, looked at me with barely concealed amusement. "An ice scraper, Xander. Really?" "It is not about the scraper, Torres. It is about holding people accountable. I have got video evidence of the theft." She lied about it when confronted, and now she is using her HOA position to retaliate against me. This needs to be documented. His expression sobered. "Yeah, okay, I get it. Some of these HOA people are nuts. All right, let's get this filed properly." I provided him with a copy of the security footage and gave a full statement about the incident. He entered everything into the system and gave me a case number. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Well, since you have clear evidence, a detective will probably want to review it. Given that it is a pretty minor theft, it will not be a high priority, but they will follow up. Someone will likely contact Morrison and give her a chance to return the property. If she refuses or continues to deny it, they might pursue charges. Charges for a $5 ice scraper. Torres shrugged. Theft is theft, man. And with the video evidence, it is pretty cut and dried. Plus, if she is using her HOA position to retaliate, that could be seen as harassment or abuse of power. Might be worth having someone look into the HOA's activities more broadly. That gave me an idea. How would one go about requesting an investigation into an HOA? Depends on what you think they are doing wrong. If it is criminal activity, that is our jurisdiction. If it is violation of HOA regulations or bylaws, that is usually a civil matter. Why, you think they are up to something? I do not know, but Linda and Patricia have been running this HOA like their personal fiefdom for years. The fines are excessive, the rules are arbitrary, and they seem to target certain residents more than others. It might be worth looking into. Torres leaned back in his chair. Tell you what. Let me run this by my sergeant. If there is enough to warrant looking into it, maybe we can dig a little deeper. No promises, but it is worth asking. I thanked him and left the station feeling slightly better. At least the theft was officially documented now. Whatever happened next, there would be a record of Linda's actions. I got home around noon and decided to check my mailbox. Inside was another notice from the HOA, this one informing me that my trash bins had been left visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day, which was a violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws. The fine was $100. I looked at my trash bins. They were in the same spot they had been for the past 6 months, tucked on the side of my garage where they were barely visible from the street. I walked to the curb and looked back at my house. You could only see the very edge of one bin if you knew exactly where to look. This was another bogus violation, another act of retaliation. I took photos of the bins from multiple angles, clearly showing how minimally visible they were, and decided to document everything. If this was going to escalate, I wanted a paper trail of every single thing the HOA did. Over the next week, I received 3 more violation notices. One for a small oil stain on my driveway, another for a lawn ornament that was apparently too tall according to HOA guidelines, even though that ornament had been there for over a year, and a third for parking my personal vehicle on the street overnight, which was supposedly not allowed except for guests. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $75 to $200. I was not the only one being targeted either. I started talking to other neighbors and discovered that anyone who had ever crossed Linda or Patricia had experienced similar treatment. My neighbor 3 doors down, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, had been fined over $1,000 in the past year for various minor infractions. Another neighbor, Tom Braddock, had received so many violations that he was considering selling his house just to get away from the HOA. It became clear that Linda and Patricia were abusing their positions, using the HOA as a weapon against anyone they did not like. And because most people did not want the hassle of fighting back, they just paid the fines and tried to stay under the radar. But I was not most people. I was a cop, and I knew how to build a case. I started collecting evidence. I photographed every violation notice I received and compared them to the actual HOA bylaws. In many cases, the violations were either completely fabricated or based on extremely loose interpretations of vague rules. I talked to other residents and got copies of their violation notices as well. A pattern emerged. Linda and Patricia were targeting specific people with excessive fines while ignoring identical violations from residents they liked. I also started researching Ohio HOA laws and discovered something interesting. HOAs are required to follow their own bylaws, and cannot arbitrarily enforce rules or issue fines without proper procedure. They also cannot retaliate against homeowners who file complaints or exercise their legal rights. Everything Linda and Patricia were doing could potentially be challenged in court, but before going the legal route, I wanted to try one more time to resolve this directly. I requested a meeting with the full HOA board, which consisted of Patricia, Linda, and 3 other residents. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at Patricia's house. I showed up with a folder containing all my documentation, copies of violation notices, photos showing that many of the alleged violations did not actually exist, the security footage of Linda stealing my scraper, and statements from other residents about their experiences with the HOA. The meeting started with Patricia calling things to order in her living room, which had been set up with chairs arranged in a semicircle. Linda sat to her right, looking at me with barely concealed hostility. The other 3 board members, 2 men and 1 woman who I knew only in passing, looked uncomfortable, like they would rather be anywhere else. "Thank you for coming, Ryan," Patricia began. "You requested this meeting to discuss your recent violation notices. The floor is yours." I laid out my case methodically. I showed them each violation notice I had received and explained why each one was either invalid or retaliatory. I played the security footage showing Linda taking my scraper. I shared the statements from other residents about their experiences. I cited specific HOA bylaws that Linda and Patricia had violated in their enforcement actions. By the time I finished, the 3 other board members looked genuinely troubled. One of them, a man named George Perkins, spoke up. "I was not aware that any of this was happening." "Patricia, Linda, why were these violations issued if they do not actually violate any rules?" Patricia started to respond, but Linda cut her off. "This is ridiculous. Ryan is just upset because he got caught breaking rules and now he is trying to make us look bad. Every violation we issued was legitimate." I turned to look at her directly. "Including the ice scraper you stole from my driveway. Was that legitimate?" Her face flushed red. "I did not steal anything. That scraper was mine." "Then how do you explain the security footage showing you walking over to my car and taking it? That footage does not show anything clearly. You are making assumptions." George spoke up again. "I just watched the footage, Linda. It is pretty clear. We can all see you taking something from Ryan's car." Linda stood up abruptly. "I do not have to sit here and be accused of things. This whole meeting is a witch hunt." "Sit down, Linda," Patricia said quietly. "We need to address this." "There is nothing to address. Ryan is lying, and you are all believing him because you want to undermine the work we have been doing to maintain this community's standards." The 3rd board member, a woman named Susan Gilmore, finally spoke. "Linda, if you took Ryan's property, you need to return it and apologize. And we need to review all recent violation notices to make sure they are legitimate. This has gotten out of hand." "I am not apologizing for anything." Linda's voice had risen to a shout. "And if you 3 do not have the backbone to support proper enforcement of our rules, then maybe you should not be on this board." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of Patricia's house, slamming the door behind her. The room fell silent. Patricia looked exhausted. "I apologize for that. Linda has been under a lot of stress lately, but that does not excuse her behavior or some of the decisions that have been made. Ryan, I think you have valid concerns and the board needs to review our enforcement procedures." George nodded. "I move that we void all violations issued to Ryan in the past 2 weeks pending a full review." "All in favor?" The 3 board members who were not Patricia all said aye. Patricia hesitated, then reluctantly added her vote. The motion passed. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you all taking this seriously. But I want to be clear. Linda stole my property and has been retaliating against me and other residents for months. That is not just an HOA issue. That is a legal issue. I have already filed a police report about the theft, and I am prepared to take further action if necessary." Patricia nodded slowly. "I understand. The board will discuss Linda's position and determine appropriate next steps. In the meantime, I will personally ensure that no further invalid violations are issued." The meeting ended shortly after, and I left feeling cautiously optimistic. At least some of the board members seemed reasonable and willing to address the problems. But I had a feeling Linda was not going to let this go easily. I was right. 2 days later, I was at work on a Saturday evening shift when I got a call from dispatch. There was a noise complaint at my address. My heart sank. I was not even home. I lived alone and my house should have been quiet. I radioed back. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. That noise complaint is at my residence. I am currently on shift and not home. Can you get more details? Standby 47. A moment later, dispatch came back. "Caller reports loud music and shouting coming from the address." Caller is a Linda Morrison, lives across the street. She says it has been going on for over an hour. Of course it was Linda. And of course she was lying. I explained the situation to my sergeant, who authorized me to swing by my house to check it out. When I arrived, everything was dark and quiet, exactly as I had left it. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I even went inside and looked around. There was no sign of any disturbance. I walked across the street to Linda's house and knocked on her door. She answered, looking surprised to see me in uniform. "Officer Xander, I did not realize you were the one responding. Linda, you called in a noise complaint about my house. I am not home and there is no noise. Why did you file a false report?" It was not false. I heard loud music. "Linda, making false reports to police is a crime. If you continue to harass me, I will file charges for filing a false police report in addition to the theft charges that are already being processed." Her expression hardened. "Are you threatening me?" "I am informing you of the consequences of your actions. Return my ice scraper, stop filing false complaints, and leave me alone. This ends now." I walked back to my cruiser and documented the false noise complaint in my report. This was getting completely out of hand. Linda was escalating rather than backing down, and I realized that this was not going to resolve itself peacefully. The following Monday, I got a call from Detective Jake Sullivan. He had been assigned to review my theft report. "Hey Ryan, so I looked at your case. The footage is clear, and Morrison definitely took your property. I am going to give her a call and offer her a chance to return it, and maybe we can avoid charges. But between you and me, this woman sounds like a piece of work. That is putting it mildly." "Yeah, well, I will let you know how it goes." Later that day, Jake called me back. "Okay, so I spoke with Linda Morrison. She is maintaining that the scraper is hers and that your footage does not prove anything. I told her that is not how evidence works, but she was not having it. She also complained about you harassing her and threatened to file a complaint against you with the department. Of course she did. Here is the thing, though. Since she is refusing to return the property and we have clear evidence of theft, I am moving forward with charges. It is petty theft, a misdemeanor, but given her position on the HOA and the apparent pattern of harassment, the prosecutor might be interested in pursuing it. I am also going to recommend that someone look into the HOA's activities more broadly, because this sounds like a pattern of abuse of power. Thanks, Jake. I appreciate you taking this seriously. Hey, theft is theft, and people who think they are above the law because they have a little bit of authority need to be held accountable. A few days later, Linda Morrison was formally charged with petty theft. She received a summons to appear in court, and according to the neighborhood gossip, she was absolutely furious. She tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that it was a misunderstanding and that the whole thing was ridiculous, but the prosecutor's office stood firm. The evidence was too clear. Meanwhile, the HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Linda from her position as vice president. Patricia resigned as well, apparently tired of the drama and not wanting to be associated with the controversy. George Perkins was elected as the new president, and he immediately announced a full review of all HOA enforcement actions from the past 2 years. That review revealed a pattern of abuse that was even worse than I had realized. Linda and Patricia had issued thousands of dollars in fines to residents they did not like, often for violations that were either fabricated or so minor that they should not have warranted any penalty. They had also been skimming money from the HOA's reserve fund, using it for personal expenses, and then covering it up in the financial reports. What had started as a stolen ice scraper had uncovered a much larger pattern of corruption. The HOA board voted to refund all invalid fines that had been issued over the past 2 years. They also filed a civil suit against Linda and Patricia to recover the money that had been stolen from the reserve fund. And the prosecutor's office, now aware of the broader pattern of misconduct, expanded the charges against Linda to include fraud and embezzlement. Linda's court date for the theft charge arrived on a cold morning in late March. I took the day off work to attend, wanting to see this through to the end. The courthouse in downtown Columbus was busy as always, with people hurrying through the hallways and lawyers huddling with their clients. Linda showed up with an attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who probably cost her a fortune. I sat in the gallery and watched as the case was called. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Rodriguez, presented the evidence efficiently. The security footage, my testimony, and documentation of Linda's refusal to return the property. Linda's attorney tried to argue that this was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and that his client had genuinely believed the scraper was hers. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Maria Santos, was not buying it. "Counselor, I have watched the video footage. Your client clearly walked over to the victim's vehicle and took an item that did not belong to her. When confronted, she lied about it. That is not a misunderstanding. That is theft." Linda's attorney tried a different approach. "Your Honor, my client is a respected member of her community. She has no criminal record. This is clearly a dispute between neighbors that has been blown out of proportion." Judge Santos looked at Linda directly. "Miss Morrison, did you take Mr. Xander's ice scraper from his vehicle on the morning in question?" Linda hesitated, glancing at her attorney. "I took a scraper that I believed was mine." "And when Mr. Xander came to your home and asked for it back, showing you specific details that identified it as his property, what did you do?" Another hesitation. "I told him it was mine." "Did you check the scraper to see if it matched the description he provided?" "No." "Did you at any point consider that you might have been mistaken?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Santos leaned back in her chair. "Miss Morrison, I find that you did knowingly take property that did not belong to you, and that you refused to return it even when provided with evidence that it belonged to someone else. That constitutes theft under Ohio law. However, given that this is your first offense and the relatively minor value of the item, I am inclined to be lenient." She paused, looking at some papers in front of her. "I see here that there are additional charges pending against you related to embezzlement and fraud. Those are much more serious matters. For this theft charge, I am going to sentence you to 30 days in jail, suspended, and 1 year of probation. You will also pay restitution to Mr. Xander in the amount of $25 for the stolen property and a $500 fine to the court. Additionally, you are to have no contact with Mr. Xander outside of official HOA business, and given that you are no longer on the HOA board, that should not be an issue. Linda's face went pale. Her attorney started to object, but Judge Santos cut him off. Counselor, your client is fortunate that I am not imposing jail time. The suspended sentence means that if she violates her probation or commits any other offense during the next year, she will serve the full 30 days. I suggest she use this time to reflect on her actions and consider the consequences of abusing positions of authority. Court is adjourned. I left the courthouse feeling vindicated. It was not about the ice scraper anymore. It had never really been about the ice scraper. It was about holding someone accountable for thinking they were above the rules and could do whatever they wanted without consequences. But the story did not end there. Over the next few months, the investigation into the HOA's financial records revealed that Linda and Patricia had embezzled over $40,000 from the community's reserve fund over a period of 3 years. They had used the money for personal expenses, including vacations, home renovations, and even a used car that Linda had bought for her daughter. They had covered their tracks by issuing excessive fines to residents and pocketing some of that money as well, reporting inflated maintenance expenses that never actually occurred. The prosecutor's office pursued felony charges against both women. Patricia, who had been more of a passive participant and had mostly just gone along with Linda's schemes, agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and agreed to testify against Linda. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to repay her share of the stolen money. Linda, on the other hand, refused to take a plea deal. She maintained that she had done nothing wrong, that all the money had been spent on legitimate HOA expenses, and that the whole investigation was a vendetta against her. Her attorney advised her to take a deal, but she refused. The trial took place in September. I attended whenever I could, watching as the prosecution systematically dismantled Linda's defense. They brought in forensic accountants who traced every dollar that had been taken. They presented testimony from contractors who confirmed that many of the invoices Linda had submitted were fake. They showed evidence of personal purchases made with HOA funds. Linda took the stand in her own defense, which her attorney clearly did not want her to do. She claimed that everything she had done was for the good of the community, that she had worked tirelessly to maintain property values, and that she was being persecuted for doing her job. But under cross-examination, she fell apart. The prosecutor got her to admit that she had used HOA money to pay for a vacation to Florida. She could not explain why there were invoices for landscaping work on dates when no work had actually been performed. She contradicted herself multiple times. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Linda Morrison guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed. Many residents from Meadowbrook community showed up, some to support Linda but most to see justice served. I sat in the gallery next to Margaret Chen and Tom Braddock, the neighbors who had been targeted by Linda's excessive fines. Judge Santos, the same judge who had handled the ice scraper case, presided over the sentencing. She listened to victim impact statements from several residents who described how Linda's actions had affected them financially and emotionally. Then she turned to Linda. "Miss Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors relied on you to act in their best interests and to manage their collective resources responsibly. Instead, you abused that trust for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, lied about it, and even when caught, you refused to take responsibility for your actions. She consulted her notes. The presentence investigation report indicates that you have shown no remorse and continue to maintain that you did nothing wrong. That troubles me greatly, because it suggests you have not learned from this experience and would likely engage in similar conduct if given the opportunity. Linda started to say something, but her attorney put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Judge Santos continued. For the crime of embezzlement, which is a third-degree felony under Ohio law, I sentence you to 3 years in prison. For the fraud charges, I impose an additional 2 years, to run concurrently with the first sentence. You will also pay full restitution to the Meadowbrook Community HOA in the amount of $43,500, plus court costs and fees. You are remanded to custody immediately. The bailiff moved forward to take Linda into custody. She stood there in shock, apparently not believing that this was actually happening. Her attorney was already talking about filing an appeal, but Judge Santos had made it clear that she found the evidence overwhelming and the sentence appropriate. As Linda was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a kind of sad relief that it was finally over. A stolen ice scraper had set all of this in motion, but what it had really been about was someone who thought they were above accountability, who believed that a little bit of power gave them the right to do whatever they wanted. Life in Meadowbrook Community slowly returned to normal after that. George Perkins proved to be a fair and reasonable HOA president. He rewrote many of the more draconian rules, implemented transparent financial reporting, and established an appeals process for residents who felt they had been unfairly cited for violations. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed from one of fear and resentment to something approaching actual community. I never did get my original ice scraper back. It had been entered into evidence and was probably sitting in a storage facility somewhere, filed away with thousands of other pieces of evidence from closed cases. But I did not care. I had bought a new one, and every time I used it during the winter months, I was reminded of the importance of standing up for what was right, even over something as small and seemingly insignificant as a $5 piece of blue plastic. Patricia Henderson eventually moved away, apparently too embarrassed to stay in the neighborhood after everything that had come out. I heard she relocated to somewhere in southern Ohio, trying to start fresh where nobody knew about her involvement in the HOA scandal. As for me, I continued working as a police officer, doing my best to serve and protect the people of Columbus. The whole experience had reminded me why I had chosen this career in the first place. It was not about the big, dramatic cases or the exciting pursuits. It was about holding people accountable, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and maintaining the rule of law, even in the smallest matters. One evening in December, almost a year after the ice scraper incident, I was sitting in my living room when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Margaret Chen standing there with a small wrapped box. "I hope I am not disturbing you," she said. "I just wanted to give you this as a thank you for everything you did." I opened the box to find a brand new ice scraper, but this one was special. It was heavy-duty with an extendable handle and a comfortable grip. Engraved on the handle were the words, "For Ryan, who stood up for all of us." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Margaret, you did not have to do this." "Yes, I did." "Before you filed that report and exposed what Linda and Patricia were doing, a lot of us were suffering in silence. We were paying those unfair fines because we did not know what else to do. You showed us that we did not have to accept it, that even people with authority can be held accountable. You gave us our community back. She gave me a hug and left before I could say anything else. I stood in my doorway, holding that engraved ice scraper, and realized that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for what is right can have ripple effects you never anticipated. The next morning, I woke up to fresh snow covering everything in a pristine white blanket. I grabbed my new ice scraper and headed out to my car, ready to start another day. As I cleared the windshield, I looked around at the neighborhood, at the houses where people were starting their days, getting ready for work and school, living their lives without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment from petty tyrants. I thought about Linda, sitting in a prison cell, probably still refusing to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. I thought about how a simple ice scraper had been the catalyst for exposing years of corruption and abuse. And I thought about all the times in my career when I had been tempted to let small things slide, to not bother with the minor stuff because it seemed like too much hassle. This experience had taught me that there was no such thing as a minor injustice. Every wrong act, no matter how small, mattered. Every time someone with power abused that power, it needed to be challenged. Every lie needed to be confronted with truth. Because if we let the small things slide, if we decide that some injustices are not worth fighting, then we create an environment where bigger injustices can flourish. A $5 ice scraper had seemed like nothing worth fighting over, but it had never been about the scraper. It had been about respect, about honesty, about the principle that nobody gets to take what is not theirs and face no consequences. It had been about standing up to bullies, even when they hide behind official titles and bureaucratic rules. As I finished clearing my windshield and prepared to drive to work, I felt grateful for that stolen ice scraper. It had been an annoyance at the time, but it had led to something important. It had reminded me and my neighbors that we had power too, that we did not have to be victims, that justice was worth pursuing even over the smallest things. I got in my car and drove down Meadowbrook Drive, past houses where people were now free to live without fear of their own HOA. Past Linda's old house, which had been sold to a nice young couple with a baby. Past Patricia's former residence, now home to a retired couple from Cincinnati. The community had moved on, healed from the wounds that had been inflicted by corruption and abuse of power. And somewhere in an evidence locker, a blue plastic ice scraper with a small crack near the handle sat as a reminder that sometimes the most significant cases start with the most insignificant objects. That justice is not about the value of what was stolen, but about the principle that theft is wrong no matter the amount. That accountability matters, whether you are dealing with a major embezzlement case or a $5 ice scraper. I thought about all the people I had encountered in my 8 years as a police officer. The murderers and thieves, the con artists and abusers, the people who thought they were above the law. And I realized that Linda Morrison was not really that different from any of them. She had just operated on a smaller, more mundane scale. But the mentality was the same. Taking what was not hers, lying about it, using her position to intimidate and retaliate against anyone who challenged her. The fact that her crimes had started with something as trivial as an ice scraper did not make them less significant. If anything, it made them more insidious, because people were inclined to dismiss them as not worth pursuing. How many times had Linda gotten away with small acts of theft or abuse of power because people decided it was not worth the hassle to fight back? How much money had she stolen before finally being caught? These were the questions I pondered as I drove through the snowy streets of Columbus that December morning. And I realized that the lesson of the stolen ice scraper was one that extended far beyond my neighborhood, far beyond HOA disputes. It was a lesson about vigilance, about the importance of challenging wrongdoing no matter how small it seems, about the responsibility we all have to hold each other accountable. When I arrived at the station, I found a message waiting for me from George Perkins. The HOA board had voted to install security cameras at the entrance to the neighborhood and in the common areas, hoping to prevent future crimes and provide evidence if issues arose. He wanted my input on the best systems to use and the proper procedures for accessing footage. I smiled as I read the message. The community was learning, adapting, becoming stronger. What Linda had meant as an act of petty theft had ultimately led to positive changes that would benefit everyone. Sometimes good things can come from bad situations if people are willing to stand up and demand better. I spent that day like I spent most days, responding to calls, filing reports, interacting with the citizens of Columbus. But I carried with me a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that every interaction mattered, every case deserved attention, every victim deserved justice, whether they had lost a car or an ice scraper. As my shift ended and I prepared to head home, I thought about what I would tell someone who asked me about the most important case I had ever worked. Would I talk about the armed robbery I had helped solve, the domestic violence situations I had intervened in, the drug trafficking ring that had been busted thanks to information I had gathered? Or would I talk about a middle-aged woman named Linda Morrison, who stole a $5 ice scraper and set in motion a chain of events that exposed corruption, restored justice to a community, and reminded me why I became a police officer in the first place? I knew which story I would choose. Because that is the story that matters most. Not because of what was stolen, but because of what was revealed. That character is tested in small moments as much as large ones. That integrity matters even when nobody is watching. And that standing up for what is right is always worth it, no matter how insignificant the issue might seem. I drove home through streets now cleared of snow, the winter sun setting early as it always did in December. When I pulled into my driveway at 423 Meadowbrook Drive, I saw my neighbors going about their evening routines. Tom Braddock waving from his porch, Margaret Chen checking her mailbox, the new couple in Linda's old house bringing in groceries while their baby watched from a car seat. This was what community was supposed to look like. People living their lives without fear, without excessive rules and arbitrary enforcement, without someone abusing power for personal gain. And it had almost been lost, might still have been lost, if I had decided that a stolen ice scraper was not worth pursuing. I got out of my car and walked to my front door, stopping to check my mailbox on the way. Inside was the usual collection of bills and advertisements, and one letter from the HOA. For a moment, my stomach clenched, old habits dying hard. But when I opened it, I found not a violation notice but an invitation to the annual holiday party that George was organizing, an event meant to bring the community together and celebrate the changes that had been made. I stood there in the fading light of that December evening, holding that invitation, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Grateful for security cameras that captured truth. Grateful for a justice system that, despite its flaws, had worked as it should. Grateful for neighbors who had been willing to come forward and share their own experiences. Grateful for prosecutors and judges who understood that the value of stolen property is not the only measure of a crime's seriousness. And yes, grateful for that stolen ice scraper, the catalyst that had changed everything. I went inside, hung up my coat, and looked at the new ice scraper that Margaret had given me, now mounted on a small plaque on my wall. It was a reminder of what can happen when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice, when they stand up even when it seems easier to stay silent, when they believe that right and wrong matter regardless of the stakes involved. The story of how an HOA Karen stole my ice scraper and did not know I was the cop who would be reviewing the footage had become neighborhood legend. People would mention it at community events, pointing me out to newcomers as the guy who had exposed the corruption. Sometimes it embarrassed me because I had just been doing what any reasonable person should do, demanding accountability. But I understood why the story resonated with people. It was not really about me or Linda or even the ice scraper. It was about the universal human need to believe that justice exists, that wrongdoing will be punished, that those who abuse power will face consequences. It was about the hope that even when facing someone with authority and influence, an ordinary citizen can prevail if they have truth on their side. As I settled in for the evening, making dinner and relaxing after a long day, I thought about Linda Morrison one more time. I wondered if she had come to understand what she had done wrong, if prison had given her the perspective she had lacked during her trial. I wondered if she regretted not just returning the scraper when I first asked for it, not apologizing when she was caught, not taking the plea deal when it was offered. Probably not. Some people never learn, never accept responsibility, never acknowledge their own wrongdoing. They go through life believing they are always right, always justified, always the victim even when they are clearly the perpetrator. Linda Morrison seemed to be one of those people, but that was not my concern anymore. My responsibility had been to report the crime, provide evidence, and let the justice system do its work. That system had functioned properly, and a wrong had been made right. The community had been protected from further abuse, and others who might have been tempted to use HOA positions for personal gain had been put on notice that such behavior would not be tolerated. The next morning, I woke to another snowy day. I grabbed my fancy new ice scraper and went out to clear my car, and as I did, I noticed several of my neighbors doing the same. We waved to each other, called out greetings, helped each other with particularly stubborn patches of ice. This simple scene of neighbors helping neighbors was what Linda and Patricia had nearly destroyed with their petty tyranny. I finished clearing my windshield and looked at the scraper in my hand, reading the engraved words again. For Ryan, who stood up for all of us. It was a responsibility I took seriously, not just as a police officer, but as a member of this community, as a citizen who believed in justice and accountability. As I drove to work that day, I made a mental note to RSVP yes to the holiday party. I would go, I would socialize with my neighbors, and I would celebrate the fact that we had all learned an important lesson about standing up for what is right. And if anyone asked me to tell the story of the stolen ice scraper, I would tell it gladly, because it was a story worth telling. It was a story about how small acts of courage can lead to big changes, about how refusing to let injustice slide, even over something trivial, can expose larger patterns of wrongdoing, about how one person standing up can inspire others to do the same, about how truth and evidence can overcome lies and abuse of power. Most importantly, it was a story about the value of community, the importance of looking out for each other, and the responsibility we all share to ensure that those who hold authority use it justly. These were lessons that extended far beyond Meadowbrook community, far beyond HOA disputes, far beyond stolen ice scrapers. They were lessons about what it means to be a good neighbor, a good citizen, a good person. And as I drove through the streets of Columbus that snowy December morning, I carried those lessons with me, knowing that they would guide me not just in my work as a police officer, but in every aspect of my life. The story that had started with a simple theft on a cold February morning had become something much larger, something that would stay with me and my neighbors for years to come. And every winter, every time I scraped ice off my windshield, I would remember what I had learned. That justice matters, that accountability matters, that standing up for what is right matters, no matter how small the issue might seem. Because sometimes, the most important cases start with the most ordinary objects. Sometimes, the biggest changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. And sometimes, a $5 ice scraper can change everything.